다 가산데 제림나 낭추 모저다 안 다른 시디언 선데긴 잡았으네 근데 송샤 다 옛날 가산데 시디언 선데게 다지 배운다고 돌디지마 가산 슈트거래 가인선은 다지 다른 양 잠배양게 왕다 제가 인도 가서 아니 제가 테스트 제가 말한서다 배다 히말라야게 아니 준제 절 테스트 나치 모두도 다른 쉬나 자가면로 삼수 다 옛날 제 배자첨보다 배 가르쳐그래 롱당 리바단 텐데게 토네 다네 예 슈싱게메 신기메라 아니 제가 시다 자첨부지 쉬대바 예나야 제 참에 고야 갈래 가보래 양년들 됐어도 나를 쉬우지 시야 옆에 쏟아오지 아니 제나발로 마 두두스 어떻게 잡매 나랑 시다 신기메 다 파수지 망보 drode지 망보지 통돼 버래 예지 망보지 근데 인데 마 샘 간 템버드 마 쉬나 상주 The problem is that I cannot translate myself. I say something in Tibetan. When I try to translate, it doesn't work. Something different comes out. So I don't know how to translate myself. Anyway, the program yesterday supposed to introduction to kind of Buddhism. But yesterday, I gave brief instruction on the 7-line prayer, Guru Rinpoche's 7-line prayer. And today I thought since it's Saturday and many of the younger generation, Himalayan Tibetans are here, so I try my best to give a little bit kind of introduction to the general Buddhism. So I changed the program. Not that I have so much to say, but I just very fortunate to be with the Great Master since I was very young, and I get to travel around the world, see the changes, see so many different things. So I have some ideas and some thoughts. So I'd like to share with our younger generation, Himalayan Tibetans, and as well as some of you. Something useful, then it's good. If not, just enjoy, sit and enjoy the show. So most of the younger generation, Himalayan and Tibetan, they understand English. So today I will try to speak more in English. Then I'll try to translate myself into Tibetan afterwards. So recently, I was in New York. A lot of Himalayan people now has moved to New York, and many of them sort of born in America and grew up in America. One of my nephew, he's born in America, go to school abroad, sort of grown up in America, and recently he visit Tibet, Lhasa, and all the places. So out of curiosity, I told him, If you would ask question after visiting Tibet, what would you ask? He's a young Himalayan teenage boy. They have this funny kind of accent. I don't know, it's all the Himalayan, Tibetan or all American, I don't know. Little bit funny accent. But I would ask a question. It doesn't work very well when it's so loud. I can imitate better without the microphone. Anyway, the question was, why didn't we industrialize? Huh? Industrialize in Tibet. That was the question. Because in the West, if you look in the travel around, you see so many, from few hundred years, we have all these factories building so many machines. Recently I went to Niagara Falls. I saw the museum of the Nikola Tesla, how the electricity was invented. So all those things. So I think it's an interesting question from a young Tibetan who sort of born in America, brought up, goes back to Tibet and sees that, oh, there's no industry, never developed. So my answer is, it doesn't mean that we are kind of backward. We didn't focus outward industry, outward development. We focus more towards inward development. I think, I don't know the timing exactly, but when in the West, when they're building, creating electricity, and I don't know, trying to fly, all those things, around the same time, Longchen Ramjam in Tibet, writing the 7 treasures, how to develop inner peace. So the focus went 2 different ways. You end up with airplane and cars. We end up with the precious practice, how to practice Dharma, how to overcome your negative emotions. So this is 2 ways we went. And now sort of comes together. Lamas can take the aeroplane, come here and give the teaching. So actually it worked out quite well. But anyway, no matter how much you have outer development, as many of you now realize, and many of you live in the West, grow up in the West, you see that no matter how much outer development, it doesn't really give you total inner peace or full satisfaction of life. Recently, I was in Nepal, up in the Himalaya, place called Manang. Some people call it Nishang, Manang. It's very near to Tibet, very similar to environment like Tibet. Place where Milarepa meditated, the place where Milarepa met the hunter, the famous story. So road was terrible. You can hardly call it a road. It was a really scary road. Even though the journey was a little bit tough, but once I reached there, it was so beautiful. Just in front of the Annapurna mountain, very peaceful. And now there is electricity and some basic necessities are there. But still, people live very, very simple life. And just below the Milarepa cave, there was a small hermitage. And there was one Khenpo doing retreat. I believe he's from Drigong Kagyu tradition. And I asked how long he's been there. For 6 years he's been doing retreat. And I believe he chose to sit there and meditate. very minimum, basic kind of necessity. There is electricity, and a very, very basic necessity. But very happy, very content life. Then I compare New York. You have this skyscraper. I'm not going to tell who, but someone with a golden toilet, golden sink where he can wash his face. 24 hours angry, tweeting angry notes. I'm sure you can guess who he is. I'm not going to mention name because I have to go back someday. I might not get visa. See the comparison. The guy in the Himalaya chooses to live in a very simple, basic necessity, very happy, and continues to practice. Similar in one of this tower, Italian furniture, golden toilet, 24 hours angry, not happy. So therefore, I think what our great kings like Khenlop Chösum, King Tisong Dejen, Guru Rinpoche, Khenchen Bodhisattva invited lots of scholars, translated Dharma texts into Tibet around 7th, 8th century. It was, how can we put, kind of national project of Tibet to bring the Dharma and translate. I think when you look around in the world these days, people talk about, 20% of the income is invested in weapons and military. But during that time, Tibet, they are not really looking for industrial development. They are trying to bring the authentic teachings from India. National treasure, national budget, I think we can say, it was spent on bringing Dharma into Tibet and translating. And not only that, from that time till our masters, Shabji Dinjum Rinpoche, Khyentse Rinpoche, and of course His Holiness, which is still alive, till our great masters, they managed to preserve that. It is said that maybe around 10 to 20% of the Tibetan population are monks and nuns practicing. So, you get good results. Out of the whole whole country, 20% of the population practice, trying to achieve some kind of inner development, inner realization. Then you get those great masters. So, from 7th century till our time, we focus not outer development, not focusing on outer industrialization, but inner development. How to overcome negative emotions, how to achieve awakened state of mind, enlightenment. So like that. So that's the answer I gave to him. I think our younger generations should realize that we are not even though we don't have that much outer development, we don't have that much skyscrapers, but we have many, many realized masters. And many of them, around 1959, the situation in Tibet, they flee Tibet, came out, and then spread the Dharma, Buddha Dharma. And then, I think many of our younger generation, sometimes people ask, "Oh, what are you?" And they say, "Oh, I'm Buddhist. I'm Buddhist. I'm born to a Buddhist family, so I'm Buddhist." So this, I want to tell you that you cannot be born as a Buddhist. It does not exist in Buddhism. you become Buddhist by understanding what the Buddha's teaching is. I believe that if you're Jewish, if your mother is a Jew, then you become a Jew. Similarly, Hindus, if your father is a Hindu, you become a Hindu. But I was wondering, if your father is a Hindu and mother is Jew, you are in big trouble. That's a joke. Anyway, we don't have that kind of system. So you cannot, just because you are born to a Buddhist father and Buddhist mother, you become Buddhist. In the teachings, when they talk about precious human life, we always make an aspiration, may I reborn next life to a parents who practice Dharma, and may I able to enter into Dharma. So you have to enter into Dharma. Just by birth, you don't really become Buddhist. Then similarly, to become Buddhist, I think you have to understand what Buddha's teaching, and in order to do that, we quite often emphasize so much on Chödan Rikzhung, culture and tradition, right? Culture and tradition. It's like which holds the teaching, or if you look at many of our tradition and culture, it's somehow connected with, most of the time, it's connected with the Buddhism or teaching of Buddha. Even like Tibetan song, dance, Himalayan song, dance, the old traditional song and dance. It's all something about praising the Buddha or praising Guru Rinpoche. So somehow it's connected. So therefore, and we emphasize, especially the younger generation, to pay more attention towards our own culture and tradition, especially, I think, the language. I think very important. We talk about, like not being able to preserve our culture and language in a place where there's no freedom. We always complain. But what about those who live in the place where there is freedom? Then I think we should not forget how important it is. Because it's not just culture and tradition. I think it holds a lot of very important information. Just by wearing Tibetan dress, just by wearing Himalayan Bhutanese dress, does not make you a genuine kind of holder of the culture and tradition. I think the outer appearance is just a symbol. The inner Buddhist value is not, if it's not there, then I think outer dress is just like a show. So therefore, of course, it's nice to see the outer dress, traditional dress, costumes, but more importantly, the one who's wearing these costumes must uphold the Buddhist value and understand what is Buddhist value. And just if it's any culture or any language, Keyik, maybe it's not that important. In the world, I think we can say we have more than 7,000 different languages, out of which every year we are losing about 10 languages every year. It's a sad, but every language does not have that much information or material to study or read, written in language, like what you call literature. If you look in the Tibetan literature, which is now used in all Himalaya, not only Tibet, Bhutan and all Himalaya, Tibetan literature is one of the clearly as literature which holds the information or teaching of Buddha among the Buddhist literature, let's say, among the Buddhist literature, classic Buddhist literature, we can easily say that the Tibetan language is number one. Second, Chinese. Third, Sanskrit. Fourth, Pali. Sixth, in Japanese. So we have the maximum material literature written in Tibetan literature from the 7th century till now. We have so many books and so many materials. So it will be pity that our next generation, future generation, younger Himalayan kids, if they don't know how to read, if they don't know how to understand, then this is a waste. So much material. Even in Himalaya these days, some grandchildren, the parents are busy, and they leave the grandchildren with a mobile phone and YouTube. And the children start looking at the YouTube, mostly English YouTubes. And then they start speaking English before they can start speak native language. And then grandmother don't understand what the grandchildren are saying. My grandchildren is speaking ghost language. So this is happening. They start speaking English before they can speak their native language. So I think very important at home, if you try to speak Tibetan, so that the children can learn. And of course now here there are some facilities to learn Tibetan language. The reason why I'm saying that is the informations that we have in the Buddhist literature. It is very, very useful for future generation, because we live in a kind of a world very much uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen, what's coming. We can think back 20 years ago. Did any of us imagine that everybody will be walking around with a smartphone in their pocket? No. When we saw the fax machine, we were amazed. Wow, you can get a fax machine. Now we are walking around with a 2 terabyte in our pocket. We did not predict that 20 years ago. We have more computer memory in this than the American rocket went to the moon. Can we imagine? And what's going to happen in 20 years? We don't know. We have no clue. Politicians have no idea, I think. Business people, no idea. Something going so fast towards future, not knowing where we're going. It's almost like driving as fast as you can on a highway. You don't know what's in front of you. So, how can we educate our future younger generation how to live their life in 20 years? We don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. But no matter if they are still alive, no matter what kind of world, what kind of situation they live, they will always face a problem or challenge with their negative emotions. They will always have a difficult dealing with their anger, difficult dealing with their jealousy, difficult dealing with their pride. So if we can invest in them using the Buddha's teaching, how to deal with these negative emotions when you face this situation due to negative emotions. That is the Buddha's teaching, and that, I think, is the best investment we can put in the children's mind. I think, of course, we have to send the children to school, learn mathematics, science, geography, biography, whatever we have to. But more importantly, I think the development, inner development, teaching them basic, simple meditation. Slowly introduce them how to deal with negative emotions, which is the essence of the Buddha's teaching. That is, I think, best investment, and we can do to our future generation. And that's why it is very pity that if we lose our language, our the culture might change, but most importantly, the teaching, the Buddha's teaching. And also, the teaching of Buddha is not just a kind of philosophy or idea, or is not, I don't think we can really say it is purely kind of religion, believing in something. Buddha's teaching, I think, based on fact, based on reality. Example, if someone is not well, if you don't feel well, then you say, oh, I'm not feeling well. Then second, you want to go and see a doctor because you're not feeling well. Then you go to see a doctor. Doctor examine you. Oh, something is wrong with you. Identify the sickness. Then give you the prescription. Give you the diet. So then you follow that. If you follow that, then you will be cured from this sickness. So that kind of whole process, I don't think we can call it a religion or neither philosophy. Someone getting sick, first understanding I'm sick, then you don't want to be sick, you go to see a doctor, doctor give prescription, you follow the prescription, and you're free from the sickness. So that process, we don't call it religion. Or this process, we don't call a philosophy. So similarly, all the Buddha's teaching from Shavakayana all the way to Vajrayana, it is within the framework of what we call the Four Noble Truths, which is very similar to what I have just mentioned. First is the Dungalji Demba, truth of the suffering in this world. A lot of dissatisfaction in the life. Normally, a classic example is Jega Nachi, the suffering of birth, suffering of sickness, suffering of old age, suffering of death. So somehow, no matter who we are, whether you're powerful, rich, poor, we are within that cycle of this suffering. So then, what causes the suffering? Second thing, what causes the suffering? We call it Kunjungi Demba. The suffering has a cause. Like example, if you are sick, the doctor will say, oh, you got sick because you eat too much chili or maybe ice cream. So what causes the suffering? Cause of the suffering, desire, anger, jealousy, hatred, negative. Because nobody feels very happy when they're angry. Nobody is very happy when they're jealousy. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says that, may I suffer today. Nobody wants suffering. So what causes the suffering? If you sort of analyze it, everything leads back to our own negative emotions, anger, jealousy, hatred. Of course, among all, the ignorance, not understanding the truth, not understanding the truth of the reality. You know? Yeah. Then the third question, Gopi Demba. Can the suffering be ended? Isn't it? Stopped. Can the suffering be stopped? Yes, because the cause of the suffering is negative emotions. It is not really inherent to the nature of oneself. It is not inherent. So, example, if your cup is dirty, the dirty is on the cup. That doesn't mean the cup itself is dirty. You can wash away the cup. Similarly, the negative emotions is not inherent, is not the nature of yourself. So there are many kind of teaching and the logic explanation behind that. So if it's not inherent, then we can remove it. There's a possibility to remove. Then the fourth teaching comes, how to remove that suffering. Then there comes all the Buddha's teaching, different methods, different paths, starting like Theravada tradition, they have their own method. Mahayana tradition, another different methods, and Vajrayana, different methods. So even though the different Buddhist schools look different from outwardly, Theravadas, where they dress, how they do different, Mahayana you see different, Vajrayana you see different, but it's a different path to get rid of the cause of the suffering. So these are very much kind of based on reality, based on a fact. Just like example I've given, someone feeling sick, what is the cause of the sickness? And first accepting the sickness, I think is very important. If we think everything is okay, everything is fine, then it doesn't sort of make you go to see a doctor or seek a solution. So first thing, I think the samsaric world, everything is impermanent, everything is changing. So at the end, everything brings the suffering. So then we seek for kind of a solution. So I think the basic Four Noble Truths, if you can understand what Buddha's teaching is. And then one thing very clearly Buddha mentions is analyze my teaching and don't take it for granted. So therefore we are let's say we are like authorized. We have the right to analyze the Buddha's teaching. And that, I think, no other faith or the religious school have this kind of message. As far as what I know, most of the faiths saying you must believe because someone says so. Buddha never said that. Buddha said, analyze my teaching. Don't take it for granted. So this is a very, very powerful that we should understand. Sometimes we don't understand, we just take it for granted. But no, I think when you look at many other schools, many other faiths, it's not like that. So this teaching, very precious teaching of Buddha, and nowadays, a lot of the people who are not background, not born as a Buddhist, but they're getting interest. Of course, we are not going around knocking on the people's door and trying to convert people. But of course, if they read, it makes sense, then people, when they come, seek the teaching, then it is our duty to share with them. And one thing that His Holiness Dalai Lama quite often and very much emphasize, that Buddhism and science. Because I think we live in kind of a time where anything which is scientifically proven, then we're ready to jump in it. You remember not so long ago, we have this COVID. As soon as we have the vaccine saying that scientifically proven, everybody roll up their sleeve and got injection. Ready to jump in it. So, I think if it says scientifically proven, or then everybody sort of take it that as, oh, that's the truth. More than Buddha's words, or scientists' words. So, with seeing this, I think His Holiness quite often mentions that science, Buddhism, dialogue between science and Buddhism emphasizes in that. And there have been many meetings and many kind of, I think we can say, kind of experiments done. And I'm also very much interested, even though I did not go to regular school to learn those things. But like 2003, beginning of this kind of research, I participated in some of the kind of experiment as a guinea pig. Not that I'm a good meditator or anything, but I just wanted to explore. And there's one thing which is very interests me a lot, is that one experiment they did. I think it was Los Angeles, 2003. What they said is that everybody has their kind of baseline of attitude, right? Attitude, kind of attitude. Like some people naturally a little bit optimistic. No matter, I'm sure you have friends, no matter where you go, who always see, oh, it's cool. Even if it's a funky kind of house, you say, this is a cool. I think some of the architects who built those towers must have very positive architect. When I saw this building on the way, I thought something is wrong. It was all crooked. And somebody told me, it's a very famous architect purposely did that. Anyway, if it's in Nepal, you will say bad architect. In Canada, you say, oh, it's a beautiful art. Anyway, everybody has their own kind of baseline. There's some people naturally see, oh, it's cool, it's nice. And some people naturally, wherever you go, always feel something is wrong, a little bit pessimistic. So that's everybody has their own baseline. And then there is ups and downs, ups and downs. Like when you receive, let's say, a lot of money, lottery ticket, you receive a lot of money or something, and then your baseline is here, and your happiness shoots up, goes up. Within 6 months or 1 year, comes down to baseline. It doesn't stay there. If you always, your baseline stays there. And then the love at first sight goes up. Then, after 6 months, comes down to baseline. After marriage, goes below. Immediate family die or something terrible happen, goes down, comes back to baseline. So they say baseline is always there. But what they found through this research is that by contemplating on kind of meditation like loving kindness or four boundless loves, the baseline goes up. Baseline goes up. You become more positive, you become happier, you become more optimistic. So this they could see in the machine. When I wasn't a good example, but even we had to go through MRI machine, hook up to the computer. It was 2003. Now they have a lot of more information, I'm sure. But those days, they already mentioned that. So these are kind of not only, I'm sure, when you do a lot of practice, maybe you feel, maybe you don't really feel, but when you put in the machine and analyze it, when you actually can see, then it's really kind of believing. So these are the Buddhist methods, the scientists, they do research, and they did many, after I think they have a lot of informations that how the Buddhist teaching, the technique, meditation can really make changes to our brain. Become better person, become happier person. They say it's almost like the muscle, mental muscle. When you go to the gym, you do a lot of exercise, your muscle becomes stronger. So similarly, we train our mind to be optimistic by using the techniques, especially like Lobjong mind training, for boundless love, and then your mind becomes better. So you can see all those things. So I thought that was very interesting. Quite often I share in my Dharma talks I give, and always, no matter what country, what language you speak, when you say the happiness goes below the baseline after marriage, it gives a big laugh. So this thing, kind of real evidence, answer to the earlier question for the young Himalayan boy, is not that what our ancestors, what the previous masters, what they've been doing in the hermitage, what they've been practicing is something relevant in our world, something really can benefit not only us, but even now we're able to share with the rest of the world and many people. One of the conference long time ago, around that time, 2003, His Holiness gave a big kind of conference in MIT. It was about 800 scientists participated, neuroscience scientists participated. So this shows that how much information, how much sort of advance the teaching. So I think this is important for our younger generation to know that how important, how much information we hold in the Tibetan texts, Tibetan languages. So if we can, the next generation, people really have to understand the value and preserve our tradition and the value. So just give you small kind of basic meditation for those who are interested. So we call something called bodhicitta, what we call in Tibetan we call Chanchuji Sim, bodhicitta mind, generating love and compassion, training. There is something called for boundless love. So first, like the His Holiness's 4-point mentions, everybody wish to be happy, not to be suffer. Everybody has a right to be happy. So therefore, with understanding that, then we developed our kind of loving kindness towards all sentient beings. So it's just simple thinking. Some people will say, oh, why we should care? Why we should generate loving kindness to others? If you think every kind of what we call relative happiness, even relative happiness, relative kind of joy, it all depends on others. Example, the place that we're using here, it is all built by others. Without this, we will have to sit outside in the sun, in the rain. So feel grateful to others. Similarly, the clothes we wear, it's made by others. If the others did not make, what are we going to wear? So feel grateful to others. So everything that we consider kind of give us comfort and happiness is due to others. So that's how we have to train. So someone might think, oh, I paid for it. I worked, I made money, I paid for it. But if they did not create, then we cannot buy. Imagine yourself alone in this land, Canada. You're alone by yourself. Imagine without others. So like that, thinking, appreciating others, what people have created. So every kind of happiness, every kind of comfort, it's all due to others, the food we eat. So this kind of gratitude we build up. That's how we train our mind, first step, feeling gratitude. And then classic Tibetan kind of teaching says that all sentient beings are mother. Mother, reason why we choose mother is because we have been taken 9 months in the mother's womb, and after birth we are fed, we are taught how to walk, we are taught how to eat. Without mother, we will not survive. So thinking like that. And then this kindness of this mother, when you feel strong kind of compassion, then we slowly think, this is not only one lifetime, we have many, many, many lifetimes. Every birth, there's always a mother. So then we sort of little bit a broader mind, all sentient beings being our mother, kind parents. So that's how we train. Then then after that, when you feel strong kind of loving kindness, then we shift. We can shift towards equal all sentient beings. Even though in this life we feel some like not friendly person or enemy, but in past life they must be our parents. Tangyom equanimity. And then we shift focus on what we call Nyingje. There are many beings suffering in this world due to sickness, due to hunger, so many suffering. We just turn on the television, everything always there's suffering. So thinking there also these beings who are suffering, one time they've been our parents, they've been our loved ones, they've been our kind of family, and then feeling strong kind of compassion. Slowly shift this kind of mind. When you feel a little bit down, you feel like depressed, feel a little bit like hopelessness, then we shift our focus to rejoice. You're seeing people who has good life, people who has engaged in Dharma, who has been practicing Dharma. So we shift that. And then you feel kind of uplifted, rejoice. And then if you, sometimes, because our mind can be tricky, and if it becomes like jumpy or too much excitement, then again we shift to the equanimity. So the four boundless love is a beautiful teaching by Jigme Lingpa in Treasury of spiritual qualities. Very beautiful method, very simple, shifting these four boundless love. Chamba, Nyingje, Gawa, Tangyom. Very simple, very, very helpful. So like that, this is kind of basic training, what you call bodhicitta or Chanchu Sem. So real bodhicitta is a possibility, understanding the possibility that all sentient being can be free from the suffering of samsara, and then wish that may all they be free from the suffering of samsara. So that is what we call the bodhicitta. So this training, I think we can do, if you want to do like a daily practice, very simple, very helpful. You don't need so many objects. Just sit quietly and contemplate this. And this is essence of all the teachings. No matter what school you follow, all will, I think, speak the same. And then post-meditation, I think we have to kind of gradually improve ourselves. Not that we just make a prayer, offer some lamps, give some money, and then go back to normal life. We don't try to improve ourselves gradually, then it doesn't really work. I often joke about my weight. I'm quite heavy, I'm quite fat. I wasn't so fat like this. But I cannot go to a temple and put a light a lamp and offer some money saying, may I become thin, may I become thin, may I become thin. Om, I'm thin soha, Om, I'm thin soha. It's not going to lose weight for sure. If it's possible, I would have tried. Huh? So of course, you make aspiration. You have a lot of diet books in your shelf. If you don't implement them, you're not going to lose weight. So, I have my attendant trying to control my portions in the food. He's not doing a very good job. I'm not losing so much weight. Anyway, you try to eat a little bit less, you try to walk a little more, then you might try to lose weight, right? So similarly, I think to improve ourselves, to generate more loving kindness, we have to start from a small. We just can't small thing we just ignore, saying, oh, there's something big I'm going to do. Then maybe it will not work. Example, I know many of you have driving Uber or driving in maybe Canada is a little bit better following rules. Imagine New York. Everybody is shouting at each other when they're driving. Anybody who drives faster than you is a crazy. Anybody who drives slower than you is a stupid. So everybody has to follow your rhythm. Right? Or somebody goes zoom, oh, it's a crazy guy. Somebody is slow in front, oh, stupid guy. So I think like that. That is kind of anger, right? So I think try to be patient. That's maybe a small step. Similarly, there are many opportunities in our life where we can practice to become a better human being by not cursing the other driver. I don't know, see somebody, like other day I was saying, you're waiting for a bus and there are a lot of people waiting. You don't have to go and kiss and hug everybody, but you just sit there and mentally you wish that person be happy. Just wish. It's very simple. And small, I think in the teaching it says, Meta tamu tsamjijang tsapung rirap sekbarche. The small spark of fire can burn the whole, what do you call, haystack. So similarly, when the anger or hatred or desire, when it's small, when it grows, you have to put down. Then the big fire will not come. We ignore the small spark, and then by the time it's a big fire, then we cannot control. So like that, of course, we make a cumulative merit, we offer lamps, we offer the water offering, but same time, we have to work, daily life, day to day. When you go to work, when you go to office, and anything negative emotion, first recognize, and then there are so many different methods to deal with this. From small, we deal, and then when it never becomes big, and then we improve ourselves, become a better human being. And makes, I think, facing life also becomes easier. Like that, so I just thought to share this with you. And then after this, today it's a Menzushri empowerment from Jameen Khyentse Wangpo's cycle of teaching. Received this many times from Jabji Tengku Chinsa Rinpoche. So today I will bestow the, since there are a lot of younger generation who wants to receive the Menzushri empowerment. So today we'll give this Menzushri empowerment. Jidardamba zamjene, lanamjene, ndruzonda, laye chunenda paye. Tejendage chujo om zawa dada gada benge gada zamaya shiri hung om ben zara sato samaya manam. Mendo sato den no badara dura me baba sato hoya me baba zuwa shaya me baba narada me baba saba sita me daya da zala kama sita me zita me shirya. Guru hong ha 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 ha.